A United Nations Special Envoy is in Singapore this evening on his way to Burma amid mounting world concern about the crisis there. That's shared by Burma's closest neighbours in the ASEAN organisation, normally reluctant to express criticism of the military regime. This time they've expressed their revulsion at events in Rangoon. The condemnation came amid further protests at Burmese embassies around the world.
From the Thai-Burma border to Westminster in London, scenes of solidarity with the protesters in Burma. In Paris, former presidential candidate Ségolène Royal joined the demonstrations, while officials in Rome opened the town hall to condemn the brutal force. Across Asia, protesters targeted Burmese embassies in Seoul, Tokyo and the Thai capital, Bangkok. The condemnation extends from the streets to the corridors of power. Burma's closest neighbours today issued an unusually fierce response.
They were appalled to receive reports of automatic weapons being used, demanded that the Myanmar government immediately desist from the use of violence against demonstrators.
At the UN in New York, ASEAN foreign ministers expressed their revulsion to their Burmese counterpart. Burma sat silent, but the applause rang loud.
They are, the ASEAN countries, the only one able to make efficient pressure on Myanmar. So if it has been done, this is a success for democracy and this is a success for the demonstrators in Myanmar.
It's a good time for Myanmar government to listen, and I think we hope it will be a catalyst for them to move towards democracy, and it is for the good of the country, the leaders as well as the citizens.
The US Secretary of State has praised ASEAN's strong stance and relayed America's concerns to representatives of Burma.
I can just assure you that the United States is determined to keep an international focus on the travesty that is taking place in Rangoon.
To emphasise that warning, the US slapped economic sanctions on more than a dozen Burmese officials.
The President wants the entire international community to live up to its obligations, and one of the things he can do is sanctions.
The world is watching, is President Bush's message. As he urged support for the pro-democracy movement, his wife, a long-time campaigner for human rights in Burma, called on nations to pressure Beijing into action.
As long as the Chinese government props them up, then we have less of a chance of moving to a democracy.
China has called for restraint from the Burmese military, but today there were calls for a boycott of the Beijing Olympics unless it toughens up its stance. At the UN in New York, the Foreign Minister Alexander Downer encouraged his Chinese counterpart to take action.
This isn't the China of old. The China of new is a China that listens to its friends and its neighbours.
As far as influencing Burma, the Prime Minister claims there's not much Australia can do.
What can we do? We don't have a lot of trade with Burma, so trade sanctions are not really an option.
Despite clashes with police, demonstrators at Burma's embassy in Canberra are not giving up. But officers refuse to let a group get near the building, fearing a repeat of a violent protest 8 years ago. Melanie O'Connell, World News Australia.
So, beyond condemnation, what can the outside world actually do to stop the repression in Burma? On the face of it, there are a number of options, but each country's self-interests make a united response extremely difficult.
From Rangoon and Mandalay, the street protests have sent quiet, emotionally charged ripples around the world, igniting hope among those who have fled Burma's dictatorship. In London, Burmese exiles gathered. Their focus, not Rangoon, but on the responsibilities they insist the outside world must now take on to intervene in their country's plight.
We need to give the pressure by the international community to the Burmese government to stop killing its own people.
But what kind of action could the outside world agree upon? The world is looking again at its trade with Burma, a country richly endowed with oil and gas, but whose people live in poverty.
So, who are Burma's key investors? Well, there's a voracious appetite for oil and gas in China, which makes it the country's most important trading partner. China has 700 companies operating in Burma. India jockeys with the Chinese for influence in Burma and also depends on Burmese energy reserves. Thailand and Singapore are also major trading partners. And Russia has just signed a deal with the junta to build a nuclear research plant in Burma. And the French oil company Total says it has no plans to end its exploration and gas production activities there.
So far, the world has agreed on little that's concrete. Burma's neighbours have closed down talk of tougher sanctions, to the clear disappointment of Britain's Foreign Secretary.
I think that the call for restraint is clear and loud and unanimous. That's good. The EU and the US did, though, call very clearly and bluntly for China, India, other Asian countries to be clearer to the regime about what we expected of them, and that's obviously important.
The world is united in sentiment, but divided on what to do. So it watches and waits in trepidation.